All right, our next speaker will be Ketti Spomer. She will be presenting the Office of Wildland Fire update. Ketti works in the Department of Interior's Office of Wildland Fire as the program manager for the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. Her role supports the 4 DOI wildland fire bureaus with their investments into the wildland firefighter workforce and their partnerships with states, tribes, local governments, and other organizations. Ketti grew up in the National Park Service and spent 21 years with the Fish and Wildlife Service's National Wildlife Refuge system before joining OWF in March of 2022.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to switch things up a little bit. I don't actually have a PowerPoint presentation, and I know that the section I was supposed to talk about was funding opportunities, once again, for infrastructure law. But I'm going to take my time to talk to you all about a couple of things. And I'm going to break the rules and probably have some questions from the group because I'm not going to take up all my time talking. So I applied for the position in the Office of Wildland Fire because, as we've all said, this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity for investments in our public lands and our tribal lands. And I think that this is just something that I could not have passed up. I had a great career in Fish and Wildlife Service. I love working and supporting our public lands and supporting conservation, but this was not an opportunity that I was willing to pass up, and for whatever reason, Jeff Rupert decided that I was the best option for the position, and I'm really excited to be here. Some of the consistent messages that I've heard this whole week is that there's kind of a clay layer between what's going on in the departments, both in the DOI as well as USDA, and part of my role is to help break through that clay layer. So I want to take an opportunity to talk for a few minutes and probably hopefully get some ideas from all of you on ways that I can help facilitate that from my position in Office of Wildland Fire. Please keep in mind that I don't have any control over any of the 4 fire bureaus, but I am here to help facilitate getting funding on the ground. One of the consistent messages that we always hear is that historically we've done more with less, and that was a conversation I had the other night at the bar where all the good conversations happen. And I would challenge us all to flip that conversation on its head, and as opposed to showing that we've always done more with less, start to tell the story about all of the amazing things that we've accomplished with duct tape, baling twine, chewing gum, paper clips, all of those things, and show that if you all actually give us the funding, this is the amazing stuff we can accomplish. There's a fear that the bipartisan infrastructure law funding is only going to last for 5 years, and that's an absolute and understandable concern. However, Congress also looks at, they're all politicians, they want to get voted back into office again. They're looking at what gets done on the land of their constituents. So let's make that happen. Let's show them what wildland fire can do. Let's show them the conservation and the ecosystem restoration and the reduction in wildfire risk that we can put on the landscape, and the way that we can save our communities, save our drinking water, and help all of our underserved communities. Having said that, I'm going to go back to my first statement that I recognize that there is a big clay layer between what is going on at the department levels and what we can get on the ground. So I'm looking for ideas from this group that I can take back and hopefully help facilitate getting some more information down to the level that you all can understand and be able to access some of these funds. Department of Interior has $1.5 billion in infrastructure funding for wildland fire management, and that's in addition to all of the funding that they received through ecosystem restoration. And then we also have the USDA Forest Service that has a lot more than us, but they also have some opportunities that DOI doesn't have. So I'm going to open up the floor, and if you wouldn't mind just telling me when I have to cut this off. I'm going to open up the floor, and I would like to hear from all of you. I'm more than happy to take complaints, but I'd also like some ideas for solutions that maybe I can help facilitate. I may not be able to do it all, but this is a good place to start as any, right? So that's an excellent question. So for those of you who didn't hear his question over here, he was asking about the compliance for what we call EJ 40, Environmental Justice 40. That is part of the executive order to spend at least 40% of our appropriations to serve underserved communities, which does include tribal lands if you're looking at the intent of the language. And there's my bureaucratic answer is that that's a requirement through the actual bureaus in their allocation process. However, there are a lot of discussions happening right now about what that does look like on the ground. That is part of the direction that we give in our policy memos, that funding goes towards those underserved communities. Having said that, this is a great opportunity for us to come up with ideas on how we can better expand that. Just saying that it's required by executive order is generally our marching orders, but this is a huge opportunity for us to actually have a big impact on those communities. I just read an article, for those of you who've already heard me talk about this, in the Washington Post that said 1 out of 6 households will be affected by wildfire in the next 30 years. And so we really need to look at the opportunities that are outside of, I'm sorry, Forest Service, outside of the western states and those 10 priority fire sheds. I think USDA and most of our land management agencies have that under control over on the western states, but we also need to look at the southern tier. We need to look at the northeast. And so I'm pushing for people in our bureaus to look at projects that are outside of those western states. Alaska is not on the map for some of those fire sheds. Not saying that they're not going to be expanded, because I understand they're the priority fire sheds. There's a lot of wildfire risk, but we have opportunities to look at expanding our impacts on those underserved communities and areas of the country that don't get that national attention. And I know that doesn't really answer your question, but that's the conversation that I continually have, is that we need to look at the other parts of the country. And DOI can do that because we have lands in all 50 states, all of the U.S. territories.
So, concerning when you're pushing that responsibility down to the Bureau, right?
Well, yeah, no, it is concerning that we're pushing it down to the Bureau. That's unfortunately part of the role of Office of Wildland Fire, is that we're the policy branch of it. We're not the on-the-ground implementation. So I will go back and talk with Jeff and the rest of our folks about how we report out those successes and how we manage, or not manage, how we, what's the word I'm looking for? Creating those metrics of success. And I think that's honestly maybe some conversation we can have here. What do those metrics of success look like on the ground? Blank stares. Yes.
I have just a couple comments. I guess one's a question. I imagine it's coming, but we keep hearing about all this money that's available, but a lot of the agencies don't yet necessarily have a process to get it out. And so if you're at these meetings, or if you're talking to folks, someone will say, just send me a proposal, that's fine. But if you're not at these meetings or not talking to folks, like some tribes aren't here, they may not know how to get, a funding request in. So I know traditionally a lot of stuff has gone through grants.gov or other outfits, and none of this seems to be there yet. And then my other one was, this is just a huge investment of money, and a lot of our programs don't have the capacity to even write the grants or put the proposals out to go for it. And there's gonna be we need to be able to plan these projects to ask for the funds. I mean, we can come up with a quick 2-paragraph ask, hey, we wanna do this project here. But if you want more detailed specifics, at least the organization I work for, we don't have enough people to plan the projects yet. And I know we can put planning into our proposals, but there's a little capacity building, I think, that needs to happen up front before we can fully implement all this work.
So tell me what that looks like. Like, how do we help you all add capacity?
Well, we put in a proposal to the BIA just to hire some fuels planners, and we don't have projects in mind yet because we've got to get all that work done before we can hit the ground running. And I know that we've never been funded for this kind of stuff before, but having a grant writer or two who can help write these things would be great.
Okay. So I'm taking notes. I'm not going to have answers to all of your questions. I mean, you heard me give him my spiel that didn't really answer the question. I felt a bit like a politician. I might run for office. But I am taking notes, And I'm taking this seriously, and I'm not gonna be able to solve all the problems, but I definitely want to be part of the solution.
We joke around that you have to hire the HR person, to hire the accounting person, to hire the fuels person, to hire the grants administrative person. So we joke about it, but it's not really a joke.
It's not a joke.
Yeah.
It's more like gallows humor, isn't it? I think there was a question in the back at some point too. Yes. You asked a hard question the other day. I don't know if I'm willing to take another one, but we'll give it a shot.
I know, like with what Jim referred to as the, you know, the 40% environmental justice, and throughout like Tuesday, I mean, Tuesday you heard a little bit and we heard a little bit last night. I think through the IFMAT reports and everything, it's been pretty well documented that tribes are able to do a lot more with a lot less. And there have been a lot of requests about, you know, are we able to get equipment through this? You know, either we don't have the equipment or the equipment we do have is incredibly outdated. So I think, you know, as doing policy on this, if you could be a lot more liberal and open-minded to the idea of being able to get equipment, you know, because I mean, we got to learn to crawl before we can walk. If we don't have the equipment, a lot of these projects aren't going to be able to get done. And with equipment, you'll be able to do them a lot more projects going forward. I think for like a 5-year, you've heard a lot about like preparedness money. You know, I think people want to build staff, they want to build capacity. You know, being liberal and being able to do that, provide funding for what you're hearing in this room, you know, is probably a good idea, right?
I like liberal interpretations of appropriation law. My lawyer friend's not in the room, so I'm going to say that out loud. How much more time do I have left? I'm sorry. Okay, we have 10 minutes. We can fill this up. Any other? There's one in the back and then one up here.
Hello. So we talk about building capacity and staffs. So say it takes 2 or 3 years, we ramp up, we fill our crews, we increase our staff and depth, and then 2 years after that, the funding runs out. I just don't know how we're going to maintain paying our staff after this pitfall of funds ends.
So that is a consistent conversation, well, throughout my history with federal government. It's always a risk. It is a risk. I mean, you can look at bill funding, consider it soft funding because it's not permanent. But there is a school of thought, and I tend to be in that school of thought, that the risk is worth the potential that we may not have funding in the future. Because, like I said, Congress, they want to see accomplishments. They want to be able to say that they put jobs in our communities. And it's going to be very difficult for them to say, oh, hey, we built capacity, we did all this amazing stuff, and then we're going to pull the funding from you. I don't have a good answer for that. It is a risk. It's always a risk. But appropriations are a risk anyway. We seem to confuse the fact that just because it's in your base funding, that it's there permanently. It's at the whim of Congress. Remember sequestration 10 years ago? There were huge cuts in staffing across the board in the federal government. People just didn't necessarily see them because we didn't do any reductions in force, but it was all through attrition. In Fish and Wildlife Service, we lost 25% of our capacity just in the refuge system alone over the 3 years following sequestration. It's always a risk. But we also can't accomplish the work on the ground if we don't take that risk and build that capacity. And in the wildland fire world, I think 50% of our current staffing is eligible to retire in the next 5 to 10 years. So we're gonna have attrition. Was there still a question in the back, or did you give up?
So we have HR issues in BIA, as everybody knows. One of the maybe solutions that thinking outside the box was if we could work with our partners and use some hard dollars for the AD pay plan. I know it's a law, but just something temporary to kind of augment the HR issues that we have currently, so we could hire folks a lot easier, because we have Rocky Mountain region, we have 59% vacancies, and we have a lot of ADs, and it's just tough. And they tell us the struggles of why they can't become GS, because it's taking too long. As AD, they could get on a lot faster and get to work and just be committed. So just something temporary. Myself and Craig Cook had talked about that option. If we know it's the authority sits with the interagency folks, but if we could maybe have buy-in, and with all this money coming, maybe that's just a temporary fix until HR gets their act together.
Right.
Also, the timing of the funding affects a lot of our carryover. You know, we're going off CRs, and by the time we get the money, we're already up against the deadline for purchasing vehicles, and then that's that hurts us quite a bit, and then giving it to the tribes, and that sort of stuff is, you know, there's a lot of red tape there, so just the timing and the lack of, but we could talk some more. I had come up with some org charts, glide path that Aaron shared about a couple weeks ago with OWF. We were talking about maybe zoning, like BLM, some of those options we're throwing around. So hopefully we can talk before we head out this week.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Good morning. This is Tim Miller from Grand Portage. One of the things that I've been thinking about, you know, I've asked the questions. It's been asked several times about how to get this to the ground, but I think we have a little bit of a responsibility, the folks that are in this room, because there's a lot of people that aren't here. I had an email that came in this morning that was to a bunch of my counterparts in Minnesota, and I shared some of my thoughts as to what's going on here and tried to give them a little bit of a heads up that this is coming, and this is a strong message, and that we need to be ready, and hopefully we can start to do that. But the other part of that message was communications. I think, you know, that's what we're doing here, but there's a lot of people in Indian country that aren't doing that because they're not here. And so I think we have a little bit of a responsibility to be able to share that message out, because obviously this is not, yes, it's going to be competitive, but you keep telling us there's all kinds of money, so I'm not sure we have to worry about our neighbor not getting something that we don't get. Obviously that happens, especially when resources are short. So just a comment.
No, I agree, and I like the message that you're sharing, and it also reminds me that because there is so much funding out there, we have so many opportunities to leverage and to work across boundaries, and you know, that's part of working within DOI. We have the 4 fire bureaus, and then working closely with the Forest Service to make sure that we're leveraging the funds, we're leveraging our resources, and we can get more funding on the ground. Yes. So I'd have to have you repeat the question.
Okay. Well, yesterday it was discussed that under this infrastructure bill, that some of the funding, if it was going to come down the pike through annual funding agreements, through contracts, to tribes, through contracts, are compact through forestry, under forestry and fire.
Whether it would do that?
Yes.
Yes, I mean, it should,
So it's
yes.
automatically going to, okay. Thank you.
We have time for one more question. Nobody. Any more ideas? Okay, well, I thank you all for your time up here. I appreciate the invitation to join. I know you all were expecting Jeff Rupert. Hopefully, I was a good enough stand-in. I will be here until this afternoon. I do have a flight out this evening, unfortunately, so I'll be here this afternoon. Feel free to stop me. I don't have all the answers. I wish I did, but that's part of the reason that I'm really glad that I'm here, because then I get to hear some of these concerns and these issues, and that's why I took this job. So, thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. I've got some notes.